Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and we're continuing through our Cisco Cloud Fundamentals series, and we're looking at our cloud service models. And get ready, because we're going to get sassy in this one. We're going to talk about software as a service. And Mr. Sassy himself is back, Mr. Ronnie Wong.
That is true. That is my nickname, Mr. Sassy. Yeah, that describes me totally. All right, Vaughn, thank you very much for joining me as we continue to talk about our cloud service models right here for our Cloud Fundamentals series. As you've stated, it is for us as we continue to go through. The cloud service models, of course, is one of the three models that we have to make sure that we understand not only for the exam, but in real life as we go through and we start to take a look at the way that we access the cloud. These are some of the ways that we're actually provided that service again, okay? So let's start the way that we've actually been starting, just in case it's been a few days maybe, or maybe a little bit longer time. Because sometimes, Vaughn, people watch and they go, okay, I get busy, after watching a couple of episodes. We'd love for you to binge the whole thing, but it might be where it's maybe a couple of days since you've actually gotten back to this. So let's start off by understanding where this actually comes from. So we're going to head back to our favorite document once again, just as a brief review, and then we'll take a look at the definition of that SASE model that Vaughn has actually been mentioning. Okay. So remember that in the NIST SP 800-145 document, which you can download directly from NIST itself if you choose to. And as an IT Pro TV subscriber, remember this will be part of the downloads that you have for the show that you'll be able to access as well. So we're actually going to our second section, which is section 2. Remember that cloud computing is not about the overall technology itself, but it's about the model that we actually are using here to describe how we can gain access into it. And the model itself is based on 3 different characteristics overall, okay? Or I shouldn't say that, 5 characteristics. But 3 components, I guess, is probably the one that we can think of, okay? We've gone through, at this point, the idea of the 5 different characteristics, okay? On-demand, broadband, broad network access, resource pooling, rapid elasticity, measured services. And now we are on the 3rd of the 3 service models, and it also means we still have 4 deployment models that we need to go through as well. But overall, though, we're on the 3rd of the 3 that we have access to, and now that's what we're going to do. Now, in what we've covered, I've not done it exactly the way that's listed in terms of the order on the actual document here. I chose infrastructure as a service because that one is more relatable if we haven't been dealing with the cloud at all. When we set up the environment, they are just responsible for providing that environment for us. Then in our previous episode, we also talked about the idea of platform as a service, or PaaS. That is another one where essentially they provide for everything and we're responsible for the application that we need to use. And now we're into this model that Vaughn called SASE. And so it's actually SaaS, it's not sassy, but that's what we're actually taking a look at here, okay? So once we do this, now notice the difference here, okay, as we start to actually take a look at what's going on. So here's the definition. The capability provided to the consumer is to use the provider's application, okay? So that is pretty much the key sentence here, okay? Is that it's actually running where? On the cloud infrastructure itself. The applications are also accessible from various client devices through thin client interfaces, web browsers, or program interfaces. The consumer doesn't manage or control any of the underlying infrastructure, you name it, okay? And except for user-specific application settings, something like that. But now, Vaughn, as we start to take a look here, what is it really saying? And that's what we want to make sure that we understand, okay?
Yeah, and this is where I feel like the way that you're listing it here, it's like smallest to biggest, the infrastructure and the platform and then the software. We were going biggest, the structure, right, the organization down into the specific here. And so software, as soon as I think software, I think of things that I use, like the Adobe Suite,
right,
and the Microsoft Office,
right,
and those types of things. And that's a perfect example because it is running from my cloud account that I have with Office 365.
Exactly.
And so that's what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, essentially that's what's actually happening as you start to think about this idea of what's going on, okay? So software as a service, really the concept itself provides for us the full access to functional applications, okay? And what it also means then as a customer that I don't actually need to manage anything. I'm really just using it. Okay, that's what it really means. So unlike where the platform as a service, I essentially had to kind of get all the configurations set up to be able to kind of say, hey, I want to use this web app or something like that, to get that set up. But overall, though, with the idea of software as a service, they provide for us, once we pay for it, access to the portal, and we simply start to input our information, or we simply use it as part of our productivity. And that's what we can actually gain access to when we start to do it.
I start thinking of like, this is where the end user comes in. Somebody more like me, like you would set up the infrastructure and the platform. You get it all ready for us as end users, and then you will say, okay, here you go. It's ready. Now you go ahead and log in with your account, and then look, there's where your OneDrive is located. This is where your applications are, and you're just ready to go.
Yeah, Vaughn, and that's actually a very good point, especially since we're super familiar with Office 365 here, because it's what we use in this environment. The customer, in other words, us, as we actually start to do this, right? We don't really have to set up any of that. Once we actually purchase our account, it's essentially set up for us. So, Vaughn, you and I actually kind of used, in the Office shows that you produced, we actually did set up an Office 365 account. And in doing that and making sure that we actually were able to do some of that stuff, there were things you were able to do right away, Vaughn, without knowing that all of this had to be set up. We essentially created a couple of different user accounts, 3 or 4 user accounts here. But once we did that, Vaughn, when you actually had to do shows for Outlook, essentially the email and calendaring thing, Vaughn, I didn't have to go into the background and actually set up the email server to work, okay? It just worked. You were actually able to email from one particular user account to another user account in the background. The idea of OneDrive, setting that up, we didn't have to set up an actual SharePoint server, which, thank goodness, because if anything is absolutely ridiculous to set up, at least in my opinion, it's SharePoint services and to get that server up and running. So we didn't have to set that up to get OneDrive working. Vaughn, you simply clicked on the app for OneDrive, and it said, create a folder here. It created the folder. It allowed us to do that without having to set all that stuff up. So now, if we start to take a look at that in terms of what we are talking about here, let's make sure that we go through, and Vaughn, the change is what I think will help us to understand this if we don't have a good understanding of it yet, okay, is right here. So remember when we talked about infrastructure as a service, well, we're really taking a look at the responsibility of what happens, right? So here, of course, the customer has more responsibility, okay? But then when we move through and we took a look at platform as a service, notice that the responsibility for the customer is less when we start to take a look at what we're doing here, okay? So we actually did spend a good bit of time on that one. But now, Vaughn, as we start to take a look, notice, well, everything here is actually the cloud provider's responsibility, all the way down to the application. That means it is set up and ready to use as we start to take a look at doing this thing, okay? So the customer has all the benefits of everything that that particular platform says that it should have access to, but now none of the setup time, okay? So this is what makes it so valuable to companies like ours, whereas we hire new employees, Vaughn, I don't have to go in and set up in this sense, right? I just have to set up a lot of things. So Vaughn, if we go back, let's take the time machine backward in time. We'll go back to the decade that we were talking about in a previous episode here. So if we took this back years ago and we hired a new employee and said, they need email, they need to get access into the Active Directory, they need storage, they need all this other stuff. Well, if some of that stuff wasn't set up, and then I had to create the account in Active Directory, I then had to go to their machine and install Office on their machines. I had to make sure it actually registered, you name it, I had to do all that. We didn't have a computer for them. We had to actually kind of deploy an image to a computer and get all that ready to make sure it actually worked.
And you were the one that actually did that. Oh. That was his job, between you and Mike, and pretty much you and Mike, really.
Yeah, Wes and all of us. Yeah. I mean, all of us when we started doing this, right? Those are things that you had to actually set up for the individual user. If we had a computer that somebody else used, we literally re-imaged that computer, made sure that Office was installed back on it, and then made sure it connected to the email servers, make sure everything was working.
I mean, we even sometimes had to order new computers. Like, you actually had to order the hardware and all of those things, and buy the new cables to actually plug it back in. Now in the cloud, I mean, we don't really, you just click some buttons.
Yeah. The weirdest thing about the cloud access, right? So sometimes software that came out newer, it wouldn't run on older hardware. Okay? It just wouldn't. So when you had to do something like that, then you had to upgrade computers and you do all that. Well, the idea of a software as a service, though, you normally have more than one way that you can access this thing. Okay. And it doesn't normally require a ton of resources to do so. And the reason why is that it can be accessed through just a web browser. Okay. A lot of times if we needed to. I know that like right now on my smartphone, I have access to Word. I have access to Excel if I want to. I have access to the email program that actually runs with Office 365. All that's actually part of what I have access to. But Vaughn, that's actually on my phone. Okay. So we can do something like that. Even if I have older hardware, if I can't install something like Office 2016 on it because it doesn't meet the requirements, it can run in a browser and you can still gain access to it that way, even if you don't do that. So its benefits are actually quite amazing in that sense. But Vaughn, there are some challenges though when we start using platform as a service. So for example, when you start taking a look at the idea of Office 365, that's the example we're going to use here, okay? That works well until you say, hey, you need to play well with, another software as a service sometimes, okay? And this happens quite often in terms of businesses. So Outlook, which is an amazing program and everything that it does, it can track and keep track of your contacts and do all this stuff, calendaring, emails, primarily is what I use it for. But it can do so much. But they also give you that ability to have built-in add-ins, right? That allow you to connect to other types of services that may be out there to run and do what you need. So third-party apps is what it actually allows you to connect to. Vaughn, over the past decade, working with some of these third-party apps that say, yes, we can connect to it. Guess what? Sometimes it will work. Sometimes it doesn't. So we'll give you an example that we did run into at one point. When we decided to change over at some point in our particular past at another company, right? We said, look, buying hardware is insane about the number of people that we're doing. So we're going to go back to thin clients is what we actually chose to do. So thin clients actually worked fairly well. Said, hey, we want to install the latest Office, whatever version it was at that point. I can't even remember which version it was, 2013 or 20, yeah, it had to be 2013, okay? We wanted to install Office 2013, and when we got to that point, we got it installed on those particular terminal services and tried to make it actually work. And then we needed this third-party add-in to actually work, and guess what? It worked with every edition of Outlook except for Office 2013, okay? Outlook 2013. It didn't work with with Outlook 2013. It worked with 2010.
Yeah, I actually remember that.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I referenced that. Remember when we went to those thin clients?
Yeah.
Like that was the thing a couple episodes back that I had remembered us going to.
Yeah.
And what wasn't so fun, was it?
Yeah, so then we had to actually kind of remove that installation of the latest edition of Office and actually go back to an older version. Why? Because by that point, we had already gone to software as a service with this third-party app, and then we had to actually make it connect into what we were doing. So sometimes it doesn't work that way, okay? So as much as we'd like it to, it may not actually work. So you have to kind of pay attention to stuff like that as well. So it may not play well with the idea of portability between other SaaS providers. Not saying it can't, but sometimes it won't. Okay. The other thing, of course, is what we deal with on a daily basis as we're creating more and more shows for cloud things, right? The Azure stuff that we do, the AWS stuff that we end up doing, a lot of stuff that we end up talking about where we try to show you the actual demonstrations in the cloud environment. Well, they don't perform on demand the way they want to, and that's because of latency. The very fact is you have to connect up to the cloud, which is somewhere, and if you actually are deploying some type of service at times, right, it has to kind of filter out throughout the entirety of the cloud so that once everything is now settled, then you can make it react and do what you need to. Sometimes that may happen within a minute, which again, in terms of showtime, a whole minute with silence is not exactly what we want, but at the same time, it can really blow out the idea of what you try to do, and it can take a whole day just to film a single episode.
I've run into that myself. I mean, you actually had to kind of help me with sharing files within Excel or whatever. And it's really through OneDrive. Right. We're talking about Microsoft Office. And I'm like, oh, okay. And on camera, I'm like, and see, you just go ahead and remove the person's permissions, and you just take it off, and then it's gone. And there's a warning like, cannot remove permissions because it's in use. It's
Yeah.
like, I know nobody else has this document opened. And then we had to wait. It was
Wait,
the whole day.
the whole day.
And of course, I'm right in the middle of an episode. I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, well, there's an edit. Oh, guess what? All right, we're going to redo that whole thing
Yeah.
because it's just not working.
Yeah, and so some of those things are frustrating when you start to deal with things like that go on. So there are some particular, like I said, drawbacks to all these, right? So we've talked about some of the benefits. We've talked about a little bit of the challenges to it as well, and the focus here too, okay? So once we have that in mind, now we can understand that why people would choose something like this. A lot of times a quick deployment is pretty much it, right? Now when we actually have some new hire that we come in, well, what we can do is say, hey, we've already set up an Office 365 account, and we tell them, here's what your essentially username and password is going to be, and I don't have to set up that account in terms of actually doing anything. I can do it right here in the middle of a show if I could actually talk and do that at the same time, and not have to go, all right, make sure I set aside time and data to add in these accounts. But then as soon as that's done, once it's actually deployed up in the cloud and I know that it's actually ready to go, they can log on from anywhere and get that rest of that set up for them, and then they're off and ready to go, okay? So let's take a look at our little demonstration here that we have. And Vaughn, this is our Office 365 account that we use for your shows here. And I am, and I have to admit this because Vaughn will call me out on it if we don't. I am signed in as Lance Bass, who is one of Vaughn's favorite band people.
In sync.
In sync.
Yes,
Yeah.
because this is Office Pro Demo Co. This is our little
That's right.
company, and we have three users. We have Justin Timberlake, Joey Fatone, and Lance Bass.
Yeah, and there it is. See, Lance
We
Bass.
email back and forth through each other, and I get to pretend to be each one of them
Right.
at one
Yeah.
point. You've actually had to do it too.
I have. So there
He
it is.
loves it.
Oh yeah, I love it. So, but I wanted to show you this, right? So as soon as you get the account, it already means that all these things up here at the top, these applications, they're ready to go. They don't have to actually be set up with anything else from the first time, Vaughn, right? As soon as you click on something, well, there it is. I am now ready to create a new workbook if I need to. Notice I didn't have to install anything that's actually out there, okay? I simply clicked on it and I can access that through the actual web portal. And you see right here where now it's telling me, hey, which one do I want to pick? I want to pick that one because it sees my own account. So just make sure I don't log in with my own account, but it doesn't matter at this point. But you can see the advantage of this, though, Vaughn, that we don't have in the regular installed environment, right, is that ability to collaborate if we need to. So if I share out this document using this share button right here, okay, like right here, well, multiple people can actually get access to this document, and if they're actually in it at the same time, you can actually see the changes that are being made. It's pretty darn cool when you do need to actually do some collaboration with it as well.
And if you want to learn how to do that, I actually do that
That's
in
right.
my shows.
That's
Check
right.
it out if you are a member
Yeah.
because you have access to the Office shows.
Yeah, so yeah, if you're an IT Pro TV subscriber, you'll have access to everything that's actually out there as well. But you can see where it is an advantage in terms of these different things. So here again, nothing that I had to do to go to every individual machine and install this. Now, just when I say that, Vaughn, it doesn't mean that we can't install it on the machines. But let's see if I can get back to the home here. Where's my
I know
home?
that the interface has even changed from that too.
I mean, I know it's amazing. It's like, hey, this used to actually be fairly easy to get access to, but now as you start to take a look, I can.
at the top. Yeah.
Right up here. There it is. So notice I can actually install the app directly on the computer, and that will now sync it to that application or up to the actual cloud account that I have already. Okay. So all that's actually possible for us when we start to take a look at some of the things that we can do. Now, along with that, of course, there's access to a lot more that they've already set up. And let me make sure I stay logged in here. Why don't it keeps kicking me back out?
It always does that
Yeah.
when you have multiple accounts.
Of course it
Yeah,
does.
it's fun.
Yeah. To me, the most annoying thing about Office 365, it will open up a new tab for anything. So all of a sudden I look up and there's like 14 tabs actually up there. But that's just me. People like tabs. I kind of like to try and minimize.
I think it's a little overused, and
Yeah.
especially if people aren't paying attention. Yeah, you come to somebody's machine and they have 30 instances or 30 tabs open.
Oh yeah, easily.
Yeah.
Easily. Yeah. So here's all the other things that we're talking about too. So notice users. You again can actually go there and you can select how those are actually working. You see active users to add a user, you name it. Groups, you name it as well.
And of course, these have, the admin privileges or different privileges, so end users, and that's kind of controlled more on like you can kind of talk about like the administrative end. You know, you as maybe the IT administrator, you would control what end users can and cannot access.
Right. And the neat thing about this is even though the cloud provider itself is responsible for providing everything, if I need to make sure that I tweak this a little bit in terms of what I need, there are admin centers over here, and I can go ahead and kind of change up what I need for the email server or for using Teams, which is a collaboration type of software. Power Apps, I don't like Power Apps myself, but everybody loves those things, which gives you the ability to create small apps that help, of course, your workflow to do a little bit better. And then there is Flow itself, which is another thing. Security and compliance, Azure Active Directory, and Microsoft Search. This is kind of the new element that was added in this past update time. Microsoft Search is kind of the new one. Yeah. It actually allows you to not only search across the entire internet on like a web browser, but it also searches your own personal files, such as your OneDrive as well, at the same time. Yeah, it indexes everything is what it does. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just like on your desktop on Windows where you go to search and it gives you like, these are web options. These are the things on it. So they actually put it in the interface online. I did not know that.
Yeah, now it's actually there too. So you name it, this stuff is constantly changing. And that's one of the things that we do have to kind of at least let you know about. So what you see right here on the screen, Vaughn, we know this because we've done this, where it could be next week, it could be 6 months from now. This thing looks nothing like it did when you logged in the first time, okay? So it's not that this bar will essentially go away, but you might see icons change sometimes, or you might see that the interface itself, because this looks different from the last time I remember actually coming in, which was actually just the other day, because I actually made sure I was like, oh, I still can access this as well. So you can actually see some of that. Now, the other advantage that we have, we'll take a look a little bit right here behind my head for just a moment. So if I could actually get that to move. Notice that there actually is some message centers here, which is really great. In terms of software as a service, they tell you, okay, when things are changing. Updated feature, we're simplifying channel action terminology, okay? And that's because there was a lot of confusion in terms of the terminology that they were using. Outlook mobile support Teams meeting now. So it didn't used to be connected in Teams, and now they're actually connecting in Teams. Planned maintenance. So that way you know, and Vaughn, you haven't been checking your look at 67 unread messages. Are you joking? Vaughn,
Lance is the third account. I usually don't check this. I don't really use this account too much unless I'm doing Outlook. I primarily stay with good old JT.
Right. And the other thing, of course, on most of these interfaces, depending on what you need, you also get access to something like this, which gives you essentially a basic dashboard, okay? So here you can see usage reports here, what's actually been used. And this one, you can see OneDrive looks like it kind of spiked a little bit. Office 365, SharePoint, it looks like that SharePoint. As I hover over that, so that's a little bit of a usage report. Service health, notice that if I think that something is going on with this, I can see that there's an advisory. It says here, service degradation, which I can't say right now, okay, might have actually happened at some point. So if you do experience some issues, they're at least keeping you in, up to date with all the stuff that you have ready and available. Purchasing new services is as easy, of course, as going to your resources or billing here and actually adding in what you need in terms of licensing. So this is where you can actually add in additional licenses if you need to. Actually, it's just showing you licenses. So at some point here, where is it gone? I may not have access to that. I thought this is where
wait, Lance doesn't have the same permissions
that's true.
Joey and JT. I don't
right.
think we put Lance on the same level.
That's why, okay, because I was like, hey, it's usually over here, but that's what I get for signing in.
You use Joey a lot in your office admin shows.
That's probably why, because I chose the one that Vaughn doesn't choose to give permissions to. Hey, so
no, you set that up, right? That wasn't me.
Tell me about it. Yeah, go figure. So that's what you have available to you. So all these programs, right? The big difference here is notice that we're not really given the option to say remove. Okay, so there's no place for me here to say that I don't want to use or I can't get rid of Word Online for this particular account, right? That's all managed in the infrastructure in the background of this. I don't have to use it, but it's there for me if I actually want to be able to do it. And you pay for it by different licensing models that are out there. You can actually choose which ones you run, and they'll give you more features or less features depending on what you do. Okay, by far, if you need to support users quite often, and this is not about the idea of actually providing one service or providing that, you're actually saying, hey, I need this and all these services here. I need a word processor. I need a spreadsheet. I need shared storage. I need OneNote. For whatever reason, I need OneNote for PowerPoint. Yeah, Vaughn loves OneNote. I don't really.
It's a pretty cute little
It is a
application.
cute program. There's no doubt. But if you need all this stuff, they're saying what? They're ready to go. And it literally is. Once you get the account ready and you have that right level of licensing, you gain access to all that almost instantaneously once it's actually set up that way. Okay. So as far as software as a service goes, most of the end users that you encounter, if they're using something like this, or they're using Google Works, or they might have changed the name for it now.
The Google apps.
Yeah, the Google apps. Those are actually kind of the key ones that you tend to see today. In between, people love Google. I loved Google Apps when we were actually using it, but we decided to go right here with Microsoft Office 365.
Yeah, and even another example, Salesforce.
Yeah, Salesforce.
That's another like end user applications, and they also have Dropbox. This is on a list on a website that I'm pulling from. So, I mean, these are the things that us normal people, not like what I call like the admin people. That's what we're used to maybe interacting with. Your Dropbox accounts, your Google apps, or your Office 365, or your Salesforce, depending on what industry you're in. And so those are the ones that everything's ready to go. Sign in and go away.
Yeah, Office 365 and Salesforce is probably two of the biggest ones that you can have as examples. Most people that are in sales, they would probably, of course, understand the idea of Salesforce here. But that is a platform that connects to everything that's out there on the planet as well. Okay, so just realize that. You also see this with things like tax software a lot of times for your company if you want to. You name it. There's so many different software as a service types of platforms today. It's hard to get away from them. And the advantage as far as a company goes is you don't have to keep internal infrastructure to make this stuff work anymore. Okay. You still have some infrastructure, but it's not normally for all the things that you need, which can be deployed right here. And the advantage, of course, of that is that even if you send home a laptop with a user and they end up leaving the company, or you end up letting them go at some point, well, now they have a laptop of yours and like, oh, the software on it, which is kind of a big licensing model. Well, with Office 365, once you cancel that account, the neat thing is they no longer get access to that. So even if software is installed, it says, hey, your license has been removed here, and if you want it back, you've got to pay for this on your own. So it will give them a little bit of a trial period, but once it's done, it's done. Okay. The other advantages of something like Office 365 in terms of some of the other things as software as a platform is that idea of data loss prevention that's built in. So Vaughn, you and I didn't have to set up any of that. If we just turn on that feature, we can do that where we say, hey, here's personal or company information on these devices. Let's make sure it doesn't go out to this person anymore, and we can actually even retract that information if we need to. So it's amazing in all the features that are actually available. Once again, nothing that I had to set up, Vaughn, okay? Essentially, everything is managed right there, the infrastructure and everything. The only thing I'm doing is using it, okay? So that's where software as a service comes in. All right, Vaughn, well, for us, that actually is a good place for us to round out our 3 different service models. Make sure you can differentiate between IaaS, PaaS, and, of course, SaaS. Make sure you understand those services. Take a look at the benefits for them as well as the challenges that they face. Understand the purpose of actually using them. So remember, I actually kind of separated out using the actual who's responsible for what. That should help you also as you get ready for the exam. So Vaughn, that should actually be a good place for us to round out all 3 of our service models, but we are not exactly done with the overall cloud model yet, because we still have at least one more particular component to go through, which is the 4 deployment models. So we'll need to stay around for that.
All right. Well, you heard it from King Sassy himself.
That's right.
We're going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Vaughn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.